Welcome to Mad Men, where we gather in the creative lounge to discuss and analyze each episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which aired between 2007 and 2015. One of us is a first-time watcher of the show, one of us went through it just once, back when it was airing, and then there's me, who's not an astronaut, I'm just a podcast host. I'm John Negroni, and Will Ashton, someday, people will point out that you died how you lived, surrounded by the people you podcasted with.
Man, if I get remembered for being a podcaster, that's gonna suck. I'm sorry, but you know, I guess there are worse things, but I'll live with it.
Sadly, Mike Overhols is not here this week. He got sent to Vietnam, not for a war or anything, just to go for a swim. But we are here to talk about season 4, episode 9, Beautiful Girls. And this episode, for two people, I think that there's still a lot to cover, and I hope we have a fun conversation. I have some questions for you, Will, some things I hope you can clear up about Mad Men.
That I can clear up.
Yes, I know I'm the one who watches the show all the time, but right. I mean, you've got the fresh perspective.
I guess, yeah.
Now, this episode was directed by Michael Uppendahl. This is, I believe, his 5th episode directing, and it was written by Davi Waller and Matthew Weiner. This is Waller's first co-write credit this season. Has co-written a lot of episodes like Wee Small Hours last season, My Old Kentucky Home, and also is I believe, a producer on the show as well. But yeah, this one, we're coming off of The Summer Man. That one was a nice little respite. It was a little bit more experimental, a little different. This episode is definitely memorable. So, Will, I got to start. Beautiful Girls. Did you adore this episode or no?
I mean, I think it's more about this season than anything, but I feel like this episode was a little bit weaker than what we've seen in season 4 already. It's not to say it's a bad episode. I think it's overall pretty good. I just feel like it doesn't come together as cohesively as maybe some of the others we've seen. Even some of the other ensemble episodes, like last week's episode, I think were a little bit more robust, and I think they maybe felt a little bit more natural in their pacing and story. I felt like this, you know, I think there are a lot of standout moments. I think it's a really funny episode at times, and I personally, I imagine Mike wouldn't agree with this, so I'm glad he's not here to hear this in this respect. But it was nice seeing Joan and Roger getting steamy again. You know, like, there's always that palpable tension, so it was fun to see that. You know, them getting hot and bothered, and Joan getting a little bit more agency again. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, where do you stand on it?
I think this is definitely an episode that gets better when you watch it, the more often you watch it, because you do get to appreciate a lot of its moments. It is a weird one. There are certain aspects of it that are a little, I don't know, like uncomfortable to watch. You know, it's not fun watching Sally thrash about, you know, and throw a tantrum and all that stuff. But also, I gotta say though, like the themes of this episode, I don't think that they're not cohesive. I think they're a little simple. It's one of those things where I think the theme is there. I think the theme is applied pretty well, but it's not that subversive. It's just kind of straightforward and matter of fact in some ways. We said the last episode was a lot like season 1. This one's also got some season 1 in it, but kind of the parts of season 1 that were a little bit too on the nose in terms of sexism and the way women's lives revolve around men. It did feel a little bit of like redux of some of that stuff, but let's get into it. So what do you think? What was your takeaway on the theme of the episode? What do you think this episode's really trying to say underneath it all?
I mean, obviously we have the central focus on several of the ladies this time around. Faye, of course, as well as Joan, as we mentioned, and Peggy and Sally, and even to a more dramatic extent, Mrs. Blankenship. You know, we have all these women of various ages and position, and they're at a time with a lot of, you know, social revolution, a lot of progressive ideals are coming about, but there is this, you know, fracturing sort of sense of individuality that's, I think, kind of happening for all these different women. Faye, you know, is someone who is fairly outspoken, someone who is comfortable with herself, but because Dawn is someone who we'll say has maybe sort of an outdated sense of self and masculinity and femininity, you know, kind of throws her into this uncomfortable and awkward position where he expects her to sort of child rear his child that's here for reasons outside of his control. We have Peggy, who is, you know, kind of starting a meet cute of sorts, or continuing maybe a meet cute of sorts.
It's really a setup.
a setup with this alternative newspaper guy who acknowledges the shortcomings of her agency. And while she is willing to, speak up about the company and the good work they're doing in general, she is becoming aware, much like what's his name from the last few seasons, the guy who always has the pipe and you know him. He didn't come around. The what's his name? The guy
pipe. What do you?
Well,
what?
he was. He grew the beard. He got
Paul Kinsey.
Paul Kinsey, yeah. She's kind of having a little bit of a Paul Kinsey moment where she's like, "Let's bring in Harry Belafonte. How come we aren't more socially progressive this time around?" And
she's becoming woke. Is that what you're trying to say, Will?
Sure. Sally Peggy has gone woke.
2015, 2016 woke though, not 2024 woke.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, just kind of doing the bare minimum, I guess, in the broad stream of things. Obviously, we have, you said, Joan, who is kind of caught between her feelings about her husband going to war and her continued sort of infatuation and affair with Roger. And obviously, things are not really going to have a happy sort of conclusion for her there. But she does stick up for herself and kind of she is aware that, things are only going to get worse if she continues down this route with Roger. They have fun. They share a few kisses, share a few more things, but, it can't really continue as it is, unfortunately for us, the audience. But yeah, and then poor Mrs. Blankenship is just doing her thing and, cracking those one-liners and, kind of staying true to her job. And then, she dies just doing what she's always been doing, just sitting and complaining, I guess.
Yeah.
But, it does kind of put a little bit of a fear in some people's perspective as far as how much they want to devote themselves to their job. Like this idea of they've been working, so hard to be building this new agency and all that. But at the end of the day, how much of that do they want to define their life? Obviously, Roger, he's trying to get his memoir or biography of some sort off the ground, and he's feeling a little bit more wistful and retrospective about that. And then obviously we also have Sally, who's a child but wants to spend more time with her father, wants a sort of male figure outside of her stepfather to be around, but that's not really going to happen for a number of reasons. I don't know. I think there's all interesting little threads going on here, and I think it ties together with a really lovely final shot.
Lovely music cue too. I downloaded it right after the episode because in the commentary, Matthew Weiner mentioned that David Carbonara composed that himself. So you can actually find it on Apple Music, Spotify, and listen to it. It's really great. It's this nice little French tune, and I think it's a nice, perfect little bow on the episode.
So I guess rather than answer your question, I just kind of summarized the episode. But
I can bring it back. I mean,
sure.
You summarized the episode, and I think that if you're going to extrapolate what you said and are probably feeling, and a lot of what in the commentaries, which I did watch for the first time going through this episode again, the way that Weiner and Waller kind of contextualize everything you just said of here are all these stories going on with all of these women in Dawn's life. And you can really take that little speech, that little monologue that Joy says toward the end, the Soshi Mehmet character, where she's like, why aren't we the soup? And she's like, men just want to turn you out, or they're not going to be satisfied until they turn you out. And there's also the line that the old woman says, where it's men never know what's going on. And Waller says to her that is really what this episode's getting at. It's all this stuff is going on. The men are completely ignorant to it. The moment where Abe Wexler is talking to Peggy and he's not even aware of these injustices, these terrible things going on for women too, right? And, Peggy's not trying to say that civil rights is bad or anything, obviously, but she is saying that it's kind of strange to her that, the people who stand up for civil rights for Black people are extremely ignorant or, completely ignoring what's going on with feminism. And that's definitely a touchy topic, especially in the 60s, but also today. And I think that's kind of where they come at it. It's all this stuff's going on, and the men just don't want to deal with it. They aren't paying attention to it. When Sally's having her tantrum, he turns right to Faye. He's like, Faye can take care of this. Oh, my secretary would do it. Can't you do it? And it's like this expectation, right, that he's putting on the women in his life, and the women in general not wanting to be defined this way by just always defined by a man. But that is kind of, when it comes down to it, what this episode is. It's a bunch of women having their like threads, but all of them are kind of inextricably tied to these men. The only character who isn't is the sexually free one, being Joyce, who's just like, yeah, I don't have to deal with this. I'm good. When Stan kind of says that to her, she's just like, there are things like, you can't do that a man can do. And she's like, you're right. And she's just like very content with that, actually. And he's just he doesn't even understand that like she's just so far ahead of him.
For sure. And I guess we should also mention a character who has been, kind of around the office, but hasn't really gotten focused much, which is Megan, who is the new like head secretary, I guess. Is that her position technically? Like,
no, she's the receptionist.
Sorry, receptionist. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Miss Blankenship is an executive secretary. And Joan at this point, she's kind of like the head of the secretarial staff, but she's also kind of like the office manager.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, we have this nice little moment, although a little maybe, I don't know if it's fair to say a little contrite, I guess, where, Dawn is, trying to father Sally. She runs out of the office. She trips. And then like several of the main women characters we've had focused on this episode all kind of dramatically come out and stare. And
you mean contrived then?
Sorry, contrived. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean contrived. Yes. I get those two words mixed up sometimes. And yeah. And
how right of you to point out.
Yeah. Yeah. We have like Megan kind of there hugging and, like Sally being like, I don't want to go, doing all this sort of stuff. I don't know. It to me, that moment felt false. I don't know if it did work for you.
It's funny. The other commentary, the actors commentary, has Christina Hendricks and Cara Buono, who plays Faye, and Kiernan Shipka, who plays Sally Draper. Christina Hendricks plays Joan. I forgot to mention that. And they're kind of talking about that. They're like, I think it's so weird that like all these people are watching. But I think they kind of touch on it. It's like, well, they want to know what the gossip is. And I think if you asked Weiner, he'd probably be like, yeah, I mean, they heard this girl like screaming and shouting in the office, right? And I think they all kind of have a concern for it. And it's less of like a let's gather around and kind of all be here for this moment, and more sort of like, the fuck is going on? Like, why is this kid like running around falling? And then I think there's like genuine concern of like, is that kid all right? Like, but Megan is the one who actually goes to help her and kind of shows that instinct of like, that thing that, Dawn was kind of looking for. It was like, can someone just take care of this? Right. And it just seemed like nobody wanted to. Like, you have that moment, right, where Peggy kind of goes into Dawn's office and it's like, doesn't really know how to talk to Sally about this either. She's kind of like, stay there. Don't leave.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I know.
I love that one shot where the door opens and you just see Sally in Dawn's chair. That's so good. Yeah.
Yeah. That she's wearing Dawn's shirt. She's kind of just trying to act like Betty,
mm-hmm.
right? She's trying to just model after her mom because she thinks that she's just trying to be more adult. I think that she wants to be accepted as an adult. She wants her dad to, I think the logic that she's applying here is that like, if I'm more grown up, if I'm more mature, if I, all this stuff, my dad will let me live with him. My dad will let me be with him in this way. And like, it's heartbreaking, honestly. It's like so sad to watch.
And I was curious to ask, and I think this is a decent enough thread to do so. Where do you stand on Betty in this episode? Do you think it was fair for her to do that? Or do you think it was a little out of line for her to just kind of throw, I mean, not that she intentionally had Sally, come to the office, but you think that, her just kind of being defiant, be like, I'll pick her up tomorrow, was out of line? Or you think that was kind of deserved by how much Dawn's been kind of AWOL of late?
I'm on Betty's side. So I'll turn it around on you. Why do you think Betty did that?
Well, I mean, it was probably just exasperation at this point. And also, I mean, it's probably maybe a little bit of comeuppance for Dawn, being, just like I said, absent and, kind of picking and choosing when he wants to be a father to these children. And, like the times where they do want him there, he's, having benders and doing who knows what. And then the times where they don't want him there, like Gene's birthday last episode, he's just like, hey, I'm a dad. I'm here, baby Gene.
Yeah,
boppity boo.
No, yeah, I think you're touching on it spot on. I mean, I think what it is that Betty has had to deal with all of Sally's shenanigans, right? And she's had to be there for all the tough moments. Weiner mentioned this too. It's like, for her, like the parenting hasn't been like, she hasn't benefited the way Don has from being like the cool parent of like, oh, the parent that Sally goes to because he's the nice one, because he hasn't had to be there for all of the really tough stuff. And I think Betty sees this as an opportunity to be like, you know what, like you deal with her and you experience this and like see what I'm going through. And I think Betty wins in this episode because by the end, Sally is disillusioned by her father, that ideal kind of version of her dad that she has kind of just wished for herself and pretended like, oh, all my problems would be solved if I could just live with my dad. But she comes to find that like, no, I mean, he's going to let her down. And so this is such a pivotal moment for her. Christina Hendricks mentions that too. She's like, Christina Hendricks and Buono, I think, were just like, this is just such a defining moment for Sally Draper, even if like the audience doesn't necessarily catch that on the first watch.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
Lots to talk about in this episode, though. I wanted to mention something kind of interesting. Like we've been watching for this season, Don be kind of this divorced dad, and this episode really covers a lot of that too. I mean, just kind of showing like how awkward he is, and really just not understanding like how to emotionally deal with his child. A lot of this dynamic, and particularly with the way Sally is processing all of this, is based on Lisa Albert. So Lisa Albert, who has been part of the show for a long time, directed and written, I want to say, I'll fact check myself on that. But oh yeah, she's written episodes. I don't know if she's ever directed one. I don't think so. No, I think just written. But she's worked on a lot of the shows so far. And Lisa Albert, who might also be a producer, she based a lot of the kind of like foundation of Sally and how Sally is dealing with this stuff with her own experience as the daughter of like divorced parents. Because it's not something that really comes from Weiner. And this episode in particular, even though she doesn't have a co-writing credit, I think she was pretty instrumental in helping kind of bring this episode together. She did co-write, by the way, last week's episode, I forgot to mention. So there you go. But yeah, I forgot to mention this aired September 19th, 2010, and high ratings, not quite as high as The Summer Man, but 2.29 million. So Suitcase kind of like perked up the ratings. Summer Man really brought it a bit higher. And then Beautiful Girls stayed pretty close. Like it just dipped a tiny bit. But this stretch of 3 episodes definitely was like, okay, you know, Mad Men was kind of getting a little bit more popular at that time in September. So there you go. But yeah, I didn't have anything to ask you about that with the Lisa Albert thing. I just thought it was interesting.
Well,
I didn't tee you up at all.
Yeah, you didn't. But well, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Will. How are you?
I'm all right. You have a trip coming up, right?
A what coming up?
Aren't you traveling soon?
Traveling. Yeah, I'm going to be in Florida. You know, okay. Speaking of hanging out with your parents, be hanging out with my parents and my siblings. I haven't seen my siblings in 4 years.
Wow.
4.5 years. My nieces, my nephews. But the listeners are not going to care because they want to hear about Mad Men.
I just realized that you'll be with your nieces just when the new Despicable Me is going to come out. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts there. Hopefully we can discuss it on Cinemaholics at a future episode. Yeah.
I haven't seen Despicable Me 3 and I'm not going to, but I'm sure I'll be able to catch up with like a 2-minute YouTube video or something.
Yeah, I think fine.
Yeah, you know, like when Sally is just sort of like, Dawn is kind of like, don't you want to, who's gonna look after your brothers? Or I'm just like, oh, you know, I don't talk to my siblings anymore. I'm just kidding. I call them up and stuff. Anyway, okay, I do want to talk about the Abe Wexler stuff. What's your read on this Abe Wexler guy? Do you? I kind of pity him a little bit. I think that he's a very flawed guy, but I like how he challenges Peggy a bit. And you kind of see that like Peggy is affected. She's influenced by him and Joyce, right? Like I think Peggy's story is so interesting this season of like the counterculture of the people around her age is in conflict with her kind of business priorities. And then here comes this Abe Wexler guy who really sums that up and I think kind of puts a fire in her. But at the same time, he's just so lame. He's like a very lame guy, but I think that's what makes it work. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he seems like your kind of classic, well-meaning liberal type who obviously sees the injustices of the world happening around him, wants to call them out, recognizes like this is bad, why aren't more people saying things about this? But he also seems like the type of guy that's like not offering solutions, just kind of just pointing out the problems. And, you know, like he tries to write, what is it, like an op-ed or a story or something that
Nuremberg on Madison Avenue for the Village Voice.
Yeah. Yeah, he's trying to, you know, stir things up, but I guess is so kind of in his own head about it that he doesn't recognize that, like, what he's doing is going to be incredibly detrimental to not only Peggy, but obviously the whole office in general. And, you know, I think Peggy is in another sort of position that, you know, like the one line, like, I thought you were different, gets repeated from last week with like Joey, where, you know, like these men sort of expect Peggy to be one of the boys or, you know, one of the guys, and not even in a gender sense, like kind of one of like someone who's kind of above this and doesn't respect it. And seems like Peggy is kind of caught between her desire to actually prove herself and, you know, not just be falling in line with social and office expectations, but at the same time, it kind of comes at a cost to her, you know, the relationships that she has in and out of the office. And Abe seems to be sort of another casualty of that in some respects. But at the same time, you know, it seems like Peggy of late has kind of been, I don't know, picking some duds in the men department. I don't know. It's just like,
yeah, Mark, Duck.
Yeah. It's just
Duck,
like,
the dud.
right. Yeah, it just kind of seems like she's not finding a lot of winners, unfortunately. And like I said, I think Abe comparatively is fine. Like, I don't think he's a bad guy or anything. I just don't think he is the right guy for Peggy, unfortunately.
He's pretty condescending. He reminds you of that kind of person. And a lot of us have been like this, you know, where you feel so passionate about something. You have this like righteous indignation and you want to push that onto other people, and you start to judge other people for not coming to the same kind of like enlightenment in quotes, you know, they do. And it comes off as like just very aggressive and uncool.
Yeah. Abe strikes me as the embodiment of, there's that one famous Onion headline where it's like, guy at the party gets weird thrill bringing up that John Lennon beat his kids. It's like that whole article. It seems like that's kind of Abe in a nutshell, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's the 2024 woke, I guess. But that whole thing about, you know, him being this more like liberal kind of counterculture leftist guy, but also being very sexist, is based on a lot of stereotypes, and rightfully so, of that era. Something you've seen in things like Forrest Gump kind of makes fun of that kind of thing. But also Weiner said that he read a lot of like memoirs and stuff of the folks in this era, a lot of the women in this era, who would talk about how just like plain misogynistic these guys were. A lot of them weren't quite as misogynistic or sexist as the more traditional conventional conservatives at the time, sure, but it was still there. There was kind of like this like, well, I'm kind of more progressively minded about this thing. That means that I've got it all figured out and I'm living a life of integrity, when really like there's a lot of other like self-examination, you know, opportunities for guys like this. That said, you know, I think with Peggy, like, it's just so interesting. Like, she is clearly like sympathetic to what he's talking about. But I think what makes her character more interesting, and I think this is the heart of what makes a lot of characters in Mad Men interesting, is that she has kind of like this moral code, this virtue for like people should be treated, you know, correctly, or you know, this shouldn't be happening to Black people in the South and all this stuff. But there's a line of like where that stops being applied for her. That's what makes a good character. It's like, if a character is just purely like racist or just purely like anti-racist, you know, they're not going to be that interesting unless you contrast them to a character who's actually having a real conflict about that sort of thing. So a character who's like, I'm very brave unless this happens. That's a story. Like, it's so easy to bring a story out of that. And Peggy is just always that kind of character of like, I care about other people. You know, I want the world to be a better place, but not necessarily if it affects, you know, my job in advertising and how I view my identity. And that is like the heart of that this character at this point in the show. And I just find it, you know, once again, like the show, the series, just continuing to find ways to make Peggy super interesting. And this season in particular is such a strong one for her.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. We kind of semi-joked about it already, but you can imagine the sort of, I don't know, like 2016 or post-2016 version of this that probably would be softer to Peggy, kind of make her a little more ahead of her time. maybe does kind of do something like that. Like, wasn't there a show the Amazon Prime did that's like kind of like this, like Women Who Work or something like?
Yeah, Good Girls Revolt or something
Yeah,
like
that's right.
that.
Yeah, and I never watched it, but it kind of seems like a lesser version of Mad Men in some respects. I mean,
Yeah,
it could
I watched
be
the first episode. It didn't have the sauce.
right. I don't know. I know, like I said, I've never watched it. I think it only got like 1 or 2 seasons, so I'm not trying
Just one, I think.
Yeah. But, I could just imagine, like you're saying, like this sort of, weaker version where it's like Sally really takes it to heart and maybe she doesn't get with Abe, but she really, sticks it. And it's like, no, we got to get Harry Belafonte or else, like I'm walking or something stupid or whatever.
Yeah,
but,
she pushes it. You have a few moments where characters are standing up to Don, which is kind of interesting. Ken Cosgrove in this episode, even Debbie Waller points this out. She's like, I don't think we've ever seen Ken kind of push back against Don before in a meeting, but he has that moment where he's kind of like, sure, you can have both messages. And I think Ken's kind of right of like, you can kind of find a way to say two things at once, the way that Fillmore Auto Parts wants. But yeah, in terms of the Harry Belafonte stuff, I looked it up. I didn't realize the man lived to be 96 years old. He only passed away a little over a year ago. It's just kind of incredible, that they lived quite a long and storied life.
You talking about Belafonte?
Harry Belafonte, yeah. He was the actor, singer,
right,
the civil rights activist. Yeah, I think he was pretty close to Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
And he was pretty active, like, civil rights, like even like in his old age. His music, I gotta say, like Calypso is like the big thing people probably remember him for sure. But yeah, kind of fun to wonder, if what could have been if he could be repping Fillmore Auto Parts.
Yeah.
He was in Black Klansman.
That's right.
That was his last film appearance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Could have lived to 106 if he represented those auto parts, I guess. So we'll never know.
But yeah, that's Peggy. You want to talk about Roger and Joan?
Sure. I feel like I kind of already did, but I'm happy to keep talking about it. It's saucy.
Well, I had a question for you about it, because they have their whole thing and, it really does feel like a culmination of something that's been set up for a while. I mean, I've always just felt like Roger just really, truly loves her. We've talked about it before, like, particularly last season when, Joan's the one he calls after his daughter's wedding. And it just seems like he just genuinely likes Joan as a person, first and foremost. And all the other sort of like the lust of it, the emotional affair, the sexual affair, all that stuff. I think it's all part of his like fascination with her. But I do think like emotionally, he just connects with her in a way that he just doesn't connect with other people. Maybe in a similar way to like Abe and Peggy. Like I think he finds that like Joan challenges him. She just doesn't let him walk all over her. But also like when she does challenge him, it's always rooted in something real and with substance. But turning that around, Will, what do you think Joan really thinks about Roger? Like when it comes down to it?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think Joan for Roger is a sort of person where like Joan, I think, understands Roger more intuitively than most, if any, other women in his life, but also sympathizes and can like, try to help him kind of go in the right direction and help him move forward. I think as far as Joan's position, and I don't know if Christina Hendricks talks about it in those commentary tracks or whatever, but I mean, I don't know if it's as clear cut to me. Like, I think Joan's a woman who is obviously in a kind of curious place in her life. Her husband, who she has a kind of, well, let's fairly say mixed relationship with in general, is someone I think she has grown to respect and care for. And, there is that grave uncertainty of he's going to be going to Vietnam. Obviously he's not, at the forefront of the battle, but he is going into war. And, I think she isn't really happy or comfortable with where she is in the office. And Roger, knowingly or unknowingly, is some part of that. But I think she does feel kinship to Roger. And I think she's in a very vulnerable place right now. I think she's trying to put on a brave face. And I think we saw it last week as well, where she's like, I think trying to assert herself a little bit more to kind of hide these difficult and vulnerable feelings that she's having. But I think she's in a kind of delicate place. And I think this rekindled romance is something that, I think was needed for her in the sense that like she needed someone to be sympathetic and to love her and to be there and kindling to her. But I think their last scene together does highlight that. I think she knows that it's not really set to be. Like, he's several age her senior. Like, I think they get along well, but there is something that's like, at the end of the day, he is her boss, and she probably has been her boss for most of her professional life, if not entirely her professional life. And I don't know if there's ever going to be that sense of like she can be, entirely open or entirely willing to accept him as like an equal or as someone who is, her romantic partner. I think, I don't know, it to her end, I think it's a little bit more bittersweet and a little bit more tragic. And I think there is genuine love there shared between them. And I think, obviously I think it's maybe a little bit more one-sided with Roger. I think you're right that I think Roger sees this knowingly or unknowingly as the like love of his life. And I think
the one who got away.
Yeah, in some respects, yeah. And Joan is, I don't know, I think it's a little bit more murky, but I think there's more self-awareness at the same time for her.
Yeah. I think that, and you mentioned the commentaries, but Hendrix is kind of coy about this, and I think understandably so. I think my read of it has been, one thing, and I think a lot of other people will probably have their own reads of it, and everything, I think is valid to some extent, the way that we interpret this character. But I just always get this feeling with Joan that she just sees a relationship with Roger as doomed, at least doomed within the context of what she thinks that she really wants out of her life at this point. And I think that Greg kind of represents this American, female expectation that she's always had for herself, of like not marrying the guy who's old and rich and kind of treating her the way Roger does, but marrying somebody, like you said, like more like a partner, kind of like the conventionally handsome man who, is going to kind of be closer to her equal and all of that, but also it's just somebody who's going to get her out of the city and going to like make life easier for her. Like, she wants that Betty life, right? And that's what she's wanted for a long time. She's now firmly, well into her 30s at this point, and you can just sort of tell that she's, even though she is disillusioned about that, she still sort of views, like, ever since Roger had his heart attack, like he of course chose his wife, and Joan was kind of left out of it, and in the intervening year they clearly, like, for good, kind of separated. And I think that was her just seeing the situation as it was, which is that this guy's not serious about me, about marriage, about any of this stuff. And I think she had kind of a coming to the light moment of like, this isn't really what I want. And that's how I read into it.
And I think it's not incidental that, Mrs. Blanken, or is it Miss or Mrs.? I think Miss. Okay, Miss Blankenship. It's probably also a factor in the sense of like, obviously Roger was shaken up about this, but I think also the fact that, like you said, Roger is someone who's almost died in the office as well. I think he says twice.
They mentioned that in the commentary.
Yeah, and I think that's not something that she's unaware of. Like, I think she's like kind of in this episode at least certainly aware of not only her age but Roger's age, and like I said, that not only that power dynamic but that age gap is, I think, still present, and just like she can't really get old with this guy because he's already kind of old. So like, it's like, even if they're a good couple and meant to be, like, how long is it really going to last between the two of them? Roger's not living the easy life, to be sure. I mean, how many years has he got at this point? And I don't know. I mean, that's another sort of doomed aspect of it, I think. And I don't think that's incidental as far as the plotting of this episode.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it was Davi Waller who mentioned, she's like, Joan looks at Ida, and like, Ida is Joan's worst nightmare. She just does not want to end up like her. Being alone, being, unmarried, not really having anyone, and dying like as a secretary. Like, I think that, even though Joan has that expectation for herself, like, of like, I'm going to do what I need to do, I think that ultimately, like, she wants to get out. Like, she wants to find a way to kind of break out of all this stuff and be successful. She wants that cash.
Sure. I mean, I don't want to sidestep if you have more to say about Joan, but I really do want to talk a little bit about the relationship between Bert and Ida in this episode.
Well, I was about to transition right on over to Miss Blankenship, Randy Heller, who, by the way, was nominated for an Emmy, Outstanding Guest Actress in a Drama Series. Randy Heller, who we've talked before, played the mom in Karate Kid. I think she's like Cobra Kai. I think she's reprised the role for sure. But yeah, Bert Cooper, and it was revealed in Suitcase, right, that Bert and Ida Blankenship had a had a real hot and heavy kind of back and forth back in their prime time. Roger also had a thing with Ida at one point, but Bert and Ida, that wasn't meant to be because freaking Luke Lyle Evans or whatever his name is, MD. Thanks to him, Bert has no balls and was rendered a eunuch. So all that to say, Ida Blankenship, Hellcat, the queen of perversions, and I'm gonna miss her. I'm gonna miss her a lot. Will, did you like this character?
Well, I think I kind of alluded to this in the group chat. Obviously, the listeners aren't privy to that, but I think she was funny. I kind of got tired of it, to be honest. Like, it kind of got old for me. I know that's not probably the popular opinion, and like, if she was around for like the whole season, I wouldn't have been mad or anything. But like, I don't normally do this, but I think last week I did check IMDb. I'm like, how many more episodes are there with this lady? Like, so I kind of knew that this was the last one. I didn't know to what extent. I thought honestly that Don was just going to straight up fire her, so I was kind of looking forward to that. I was also like,
he kind of did, but like he fired her to hell, I guess.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, we joke about Sally being a little reign of terror, but Sally, comes into the office. Next thing you know, there's dead bodies around, like Miss Blankenship. I mean, that might have been the last person she ever saw.
I think technically, because we were joking about that in the group chat of like, Sally was the last person to see Miss Blankenship alive. But actually, I think Dawn is, because I think there's a moment where Dawn is yelling at her while the phone is ringing. She won't get it. And I think that's when she's like maybe having a stroke.
Yeah.
And so it's probably Don, who men never know what's going on in Lashton. And he kind of like inadvertently let her die, I guess. Maybe there was nothing he could have done, but
I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm not going to put it on Don. Don's had a lot on his plate in this episode. I'm not going to blame him for the death of Miss Blankenship.
I blame his daughter.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I do that in jest, obviously, but I do think it's funny that several coworkers are like, what is it? Cause of death, Don Draper.
Yeah.
They're all joking about it. This poor lady, the body's not even cold yet, and they're joking about it.
Well, that's ageism for you, right?
Sure.
Like people just devalue human beings as they get older. It's like, you've lived a life, like you're not as important, and But I got to be honest with you, Will.
Siri, play "Hello in There" by John Prine.
This character, Miss Blankenship, has seriously grown on me over the years, because the first few times I watched the show, I always dreaded her. I was like, oh, she's so annoying. Like, it's not that funny. It's just such a whatever kind of character. But I don't know what it is, but like the last several times I've rewatched this show, I have loved this character. I don't know, like a switch was turned on. Like she lights up the room for me. I turned into Bert Cooper because I think there's a humor to her beyond the sort of like broad humor that is just really touching to me for some reason. And I just love like the way that she just makes the office feel more lively and kind of like unpredictable. And I generally get sad when she leaves the show. I'm kind of like, man, I would have liked at least one or two more episodes at least, but yeah, I get it. It's part of the whole thing. And whatever. But I will say you're not alone, and you're sort of like, not being very sure about this character. I mean, Matt and Vince were definitely split on Blankenship back when this was airing. I remember it well.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that she, at the time, somebody the fans weren't a huge fan of, and Keith Phillips at AV Club summed up well. I'm going to read what he wrote about her. I think it's pretty spot on of like the time, 2010. He wrote, "She's been a divisive character amongst Mad Men fans. I know some of you found her a one-dimensional punchline machine, and you're not necessarily wrong. To be fair, she provided several different types of punchlines, but she was undeniably there for comic relief, and the show made her death into another sort of joke. In parentheses, and a funny one too. The sight gags going on behind the Fillmore family as the staff tries to dispose of Dawn's secretary and her belongings were especially inspired. And yet, death gave her some dignity." And I think Phillips is touching on something there that kind of speaks to me, because it all kind of ties together with like people are joking about it, but like not Roger and Bert. And when Bert kind of has that line about, she was born in 1898 in a barn, she died in the 37th floor of a skyscraper, she's an astronaut. Like,
great line.
That just gives me the feels,
Sure. And I mean, I find it really genuinely pretty sad that like, I guess it's kind of supposed to be funny, but like I do find it sad that Bert and and Roger just like walking around being like, they can't write the obit until like, until Joan kind of like pushes them a little bit.
And never knows what's going on.
Right.
They
exactly.
never know what's going on. Joan has to come in and kind of,
Executive secretary.
Yeah.
But no, I definitely agree with what you're saying, or what Keith was saying there. Cause like, yeah, for me, it's just like, it just felt very like a one-dimensional joke over a while. Like, I mean, like it was funny, and I always kind of got a kick out of her putting Don in his place a little bit, because he needed to be kind of put in his place a little bit at times, but probably more than just at times. But yeah, just like after a while, it's just like, okay, where is this going? But I do think this episode does kind of redeem her, as you say, and I do think the scene of them trying to dispose the body is really, really funny. I also think it's really funny that that's the only time we see Pete, is like him, like, like
we need to get a man,
like him broadly, like waving and being like, what's going on? All this stuff. And then I don't know who
wheeling her.
Right. I don't know. I also love the line. I don't know who says it, where it's just like, my grandmother made that for the blanket.
Harry Crane.
Yeah. I thought it was Harry. I wasn't sure though. Yeah. That's all really funny. And I definitely was laughing, but yeah, I mean, I think they handle the death right, both the humor and the pathos of it, but at the same time, I'm not really gonna miss the character. I'm sorry.
It's funny that Peggy's the one who finds her too. She was Don's first secretary, and not first secretary ever, but in the show. And the way that like Caroline's just kind of like not really. Yeah, so that is Miss Blankenship. And yeah, Megan kind of steps up. She kind of manages to desk for a while. Do you think we'll see Megan be like his real secretary? Because she does go back to reception later in the episodes. I mean, she's kind of like going back and forth. But Allison was a receptionist too before she became Don's secretary. So
I don't think it's incidental that we've been seeing more and more of Megan of late.
That she is kind of Jessica Perret plays the character, and she does kind of stand out. They mentioned the commentaries like, we cast this person who looks like a French actress. And so like anytime she shows up, you're just like, whoa, hey, Megan.
Yeah. She's very stunning, to be sure.
So, okay, the Sally stuff.
Sure.
The Sally stuff definitely weirds me out to an extent for different reasons. I think it's like kind of weird to just watch her try to be her mom and to kind of be like Don's wife, like playing house with him basically. And it's uncomfortable because you watch it and it's like, Don doesn't deserve like such a sweet kid, and she's like running away and stuff. And like, even he is kind of like not able to resist her charms, right? Like she's adorable and like, he's like trying to be mad at her, but like she's got, like Weiner says this, like she's got him wrapped around her finger, and you can see why. They apparently filmed more scenes with Sally and Faye in the apartment, but they just kind of streamlined the episode, and it didn't really like break new ground or anything. But I don't know. I just find it heartbreaking. It's just repeating, I guess, some of the stuff you were talking about earlier with the Lisa Albert thing. It's like, it's real. I mean, it's like a real emotion. Like I've never been a daughter of divorced parents myself, but I definitely at least feel a morsel of it thanks to the writing here.
Yeah, I mean, that scene of them in the office is the scene before she runs away is really tough. And I don't know, I think I might be a little softer on them like butting around in the apartment. It just, there is something very like kind of just wholesome about her making
rum toast.
Yeah, rum toast.
That's so funny. She's like, is it bad? He's like, no, not really.
Yeah. Like I think there is something very sweet about that scene. And like, yeah, it's like a little weird, like having her just kind of hanging around, like kind of hanging out on that couch, especially when we know just a lot of dirty things have happened there. And it's like, Sally, you don't want to be on that couch. You sit on the other one over there.
Your dad's shirt when he,
right.
Yeah,
that is definitely bizarre. I will admit. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. It's sweet, it's bittersweet, and it's sad. Like the scene of her the scene of him tucking her in bed and being like, like truly a kid, and like, oh, like, I can watch over, Bobby and Eugene. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but does Don only say your brother? Like, does he say singular?
No, he says brothers.
Okay. For a second, I thought he only said your brother, and then she says like both. Like he forgot about Gene for a moment.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past him, but no, I mean, hey, it's still fresh on his mind, that birthday party, I guess.
I was going to say, I mean, that's why I thought it was funny if he forgot,
But I do think that touches on something that I think is what really, the thing that really Sally wanted was just like one-on-one time with her dad more than anything else. And she doesn't want to lose it because she knows that she won't get it again. I think that like the only time she has to wait 2 weekends to see him. And when she sees him, like Bobby's there. And it's kind of like, I mean, it's Bobby. Like he's in the way. But I think that she just wants to connect with her dad and like have these moments with him that she can't have, to some extent she never really had. Because like Don's just not that type of dad. He's not the type of dad who's just like, all right, Sally, come with me. We're going to go do some errands, have like a little, daddy-daughter day. Like that's not Don. He ditches her birthday party when she's like 7 and comes back with a dog. Like that's Don. He's just he's a bad dad. But there are times when he kind of fits the moment and he kind of like, he tries a little bit, but it's still kind of just like, to me, it's heartbreaking because like Sally, like you see so many of the issues that she's having, the consternation, the pain that she's having, the confusing time she's going through. It's not just because of Betty. Like, yeah, like Betty is not a great mom to her and straight up abuses her, but Dawn also like neglects her. And it's like, what do you do? Like when you're in that situation, like it's awful.
Yeah. And I can't help but wonder if this all would have been settled a little bit if they had an official take your child to work day at Sterling Cooper, Draper Price.
But yeah, Don would just have his secretary watch the kid the whole time. I've got a business to run. It's like, all right, dude, chill the fuck out.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know how many other...
You got a family to raise, Don.
I mean, I guess Harry has a kid. Pete's going to have a kid.
Mm-hmm. Peggy has one, but I don't think...
Right, Peggy, that would be a bit of a shock if her kid came to the office for a number of reasons.
Yeah. Who is this kid? He looks kind of like Pete and Peggy if you kind of meshed them together. He just said Hell's Bells and wrote the most incredible sentence.
Right. The funny thing about this is that I know he'd be older, but I'm just imagining like a Boss Baby version of like Peggy and Pete put together. Like this little baby in a suit just walking around.
That's cursed.
Yeah.
So cursed. Faye doesn't have any kids.
A thing like that.
A thing like that. Oh, of course, Roger's, annoying daughter.
Right.
Margaret.
But she's grown. I don't think she would come.
She probably still would. She's immature enough.
But she's married, like.
She can bring him too. But yeah, no, Faye doesn't have any kids. And you really see her get really vulnerable. We also see it kind of there's 2 sex scenes in this episode. There's Joan and Roger, and there's also in the beginning, Faye and Don. So we've seen that like ever since he kind of, rebuffed like the sexual, opportunity at the first date, they are carrying on in some kind of relationship. Clearly, Faye looks at the relationship a little differently. I think she kind of sees them as exclusive, and not that Dawn doesn't see it as exclusive, but I think she's taking it more seriously. She's thinking about when am I going to meet his kids? And like, she's in it. He's a little bit more, at least around Sally, understandably, I guess he's kind of like not going there in terms of like when she's kind of interrogating him and she really is her father's daughter, where she's just like, she knew where the peanut butter was. She knew we had it and she wanted to meet me. Why would she want to meet me? Like Sally knows what's going on here. But in terms of, the relationship at all, Don's very hesitant, and I think that he's just like, he does not want to be like, yeah, she's my girlfriend, like that's not Don. But he is acting like a boyfriend, like when they have that moment where he has to apologize because, Faye calls him out on like what he did to, put her in that awkward position. He's tender with her. He's gentle. He's like, I'm sorry. Like he's actually acting like a functional human being there. But I don't know. You gotta wonder, like, this does feel like a potential rift with Faye and Don. Like the first kind of like the relationship just started and there's already this sort of like, all right, here's the thing that is really going to define, whether or not they can make it. And that's the kids thing. Why do you think Faye is so bad with kids? The way that she talks to Sally, like for somebody so intuitive in terms of like, psychology and research and all this stuff, what do you think it is? Like, is it just cosmic error?
No, I mean, I think she is someone, especially at the time, she was probably given a choice early on. Like, does she want to have a family, or does she want to have a career? And she's someone who's obviously advanced pretty well professionally, but I think she willingly or just kind of consequently chose not to have children of her own and kind of have a family life and like settle down in a proper sense. And yeah, I mean, I think it's not like a lack of psychological awareness. I think it's just like a general, like, she just chose in a life to be around adults. And, you know, if you have like people who, you know, have devoted themselves to living with adults, it's like hard to talk to children, because it's like, I don't know, do you talk to them like a little like adult? Do you talk to them like they're like a baby? Do you like, how do you treat this like 6-year-old? Or I guess Sally's like what, like 11 or 12 at this point, but you know, it's hard unless you're around kids, really. And she just isn't really, unless maybe she's like doing like group research or something. So yeah.
No, I think that's right. I think that a lot of it too is that she's a lot like Don. I think the awkwardness she has with kids is a lot like the awkwardness that Don has with kids. He doesn't know what to do with them. You know, doesn't know how to connect with them. You know, the child psychiatry is just completely different from adult psychology. And there can be this thing too when you are an adult, or like her, you're in your late 20s, early 30s, and you're kind of like, you haven't been around kids that much, and you've kind of forgotten your childhood a bit, or you've kind of tried to like get away from it a lot, and you don't really identify with kids like the way that you were as a kid. Or when you were a kid, you look down on other kids of like, I'm smarter than them and all this stuff. And you can kind of get that sense that she has a little bit of a superiority complex in some respects. Seems like a very nice woman, obviously, but like, we all kind of have our complexes, I guess. But I think that she just kind of like isn't able to like be authentic with Sally and really try to understand and empathize with her. That's the thing that kind of like confuses me. It's like, I think that if Faye was a little bit more like her real vulnerable self, I think she would be able to kind of empathize with Sally, but she has that like wall right there. And I think she's trying to be so careful about how she deals with Sally, because she says it herself, this is a test, and she feels like she fails. And so she's being a little bit more sort of like playing it safe almost to an extent. And yeah, the result is that Sally kind of has her big thing, and Faye feels like she didn't help Dawn at all. But it's on Dawn, you know, like Dawn shouldn't have put her in that position. Like, that's his daughter, right? Like, that is not Faye's mess. And that is not appropriate to like, it's not appropriate to put anybody in that position. Like, particularly somebody who works for you. Like, why does your secretary have to deal with that? That's your daughter. Like, do it yourself. Like, it's just, and I know like we have our own modern attitudes of this, like that are so different from the 60s. So I'm not trying to be like, how could somebody in the 60s be so bad? It's just like, yeah, that's the culture of the time. And like, it's very different these days. But yeah, it's just so weird to kind of like, for us, you know, we're so far removed from that era that it's like hard for me to even like, you know, compartmentalize.
And I think that, you know, Faye's also somebody who so often deals with the hypotheticals, that like dealing with something so real and present just feels kind of foreign and alien to her. Like, you know, she just kind of built herself around like, okay, like hypothetically, if like you're between the ages of 11 and 12, how are you feeling right now or whatever? You know, it's like, you know, it's like, I think she deliberately was just kind of like, all right, we're going to get together. We're going to go on a few dates. We're going to pal around. We're going to get a little bit closer. I'm going to probably have you meet my parents or whatever. And then we'll like, I'll meet your kids. Like, she's very oriented and like having like a very real present moment like this just kind of threw her off her axis in a way that, you know, is understandable. But at the same time, like, it just kind of showed that maybe this relationship wasn't really set in, you know, actualities. It was kind of more of a like, yeah, we should get together. Like, yeah, we're both two reasonable adults who are single at this time. Like, it was, I don't know, it just didn't, I mean, it's obviously, I don't think it's like dissolved yet, but it doesn't seem like something that's probably going to have a long-standing life outside of this episode.
Even contrasting that, though, you could argue that that's kind of what makes this feel like a real relationship, is that kind of like that baked in expectation, that conflict. And, you know, Davi Waller says that like, this kind of is basically Dawn's first real just like relationship with another woman that we've seen that's kind of just a little bit more normal, because the one with Betty is just like always on the way out. And his affair relationships have never really been real. They've always just been kind of predicated around like, you know, but I am married, you know, like with Rachel and with the teacher, Suzanne. And like, It's
yeah,
just this is like a real relationship. Like this is like, they're dating.
Right. Yeah, there was always a sort of out with the affairs, even when he wanted them to be a little bit more serious. Like he never really had the expectation of like, okay, this is like serious. We're going to sit down, figure this out, sort of thing. Yeah, I think that is true in some respects. Yeah.
Great episode. I know that I can see why for some people the first time they're like, the first few times. In fact, I was right there with you where I was like, I don't know how I feel about this episode because like the good stuff is there, but it's like, how do you take the good stuff and like make it? There are some things about it that do kind of ring a little bit like, wait, what? Like especially with the people in the hallway, like you mentioned, and there's a lot going on. But it's a fun one to rewatch. I'll tell you that much. You'll get to experience that for yourself one day when you're ready.
Well, if there's one person I know who doesn't have complexes, that doesn't have fatal flaws, and is a beautiful woman in and of himself, it is Mike Overholtz. Who did he ever write any thoughts about this episode? Or
no, we asked him, but he's at a conference, so he says like, I might not be able to get to it, So it's unfortunate, but understandable. He's a busy guy. He's
the dad that can't spend some time with his kids.
Yeah, that's right.
His baby podcast, Gene.
His podcast kids. But thank you so much for listening to Mad Men. We will be back for next week's episode, season 4, episode 10, Hands and Knees. Well, we're only a few episodes away from season 5. It's kind of wild, actually.
Yeah, we went through this season much quicker than we went through season 3. It is pretty wild.
Yes, we didn't have like months of hiatus in between, but don't speak too soon, I guess.
I know. Yeah, we might have another hiatus coming up if you're going to be in Florida watching the Minions with your nieces.
Hey, well,
speaking of kids, those dang Minions.
Thanks for listening, though, as always, and thank you for we got a nice little positive review on Apple Podcasts, which is super nice.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we have a lot of really positive ones on Spotify.
Good.
So thank you everybody who's reviewed and rated the show. We really appreciate it, and we got some fun. We got some constructive criticism too with the nice things, which I appreciate. Sure. Even especially, it tells me that you're being honest. So.
Well, you're dancing around it, John. The review said they wanted more Santa, and I'll have to see. Hang on, Santa, are you here? Oh, yes, I am here. I haven't watched this episode, but I'm happy to report.
You're happy? I thought you'd be upset with Sally being such a naughty girl.
Oh, caught me.
All right, well, thank you for listening. See you next time on Mad Men, man.
Merry Christmas.